Welcome to the Book of Exodus series on the Town and Field Church podcast. In this 40-day series, one of us at Town and Field will be taking a quick look at one of the chapters of Exodus and sharing some ideas around the text. To learn more about this reading plan and podcast, visit townandfield.ca/reading plans. Now enjoy today's episode.
Hey, this is Ryan. First of all, today, happy Mother's Day. Secondly, thanks for joining us for Exodus chapter 7 today. The story doesn't seem like it's going very well for Aaron and Moses so far. Hopefully you've been reading along. The Egyptians obviously hate them because they're confronting the Egyptians trying to take their slaves away. The Israelites are upset with them because their workload's been increased because of their presence there. And it's not going that well. And as we catch up with the story of Aaron and Moses in chapter 7, we actually see like an age marker there. It says that these two are two dudes that are like in their 80s. And God calls these two kind of older dudes and he says, all right, it's time to like go seriously confront Pharaoh. We are going to like take this to 100. So they take off and God is going to do some pretty crazy signs through them. Now, I just want to say something. As you're reading this chapter, I think a lot of questions can pop up. One, and we're not going to touch on this right now, is this idea of God hardening Pharaoh's heart. He says, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. And we'll hop into that in a couple chapters, so you can look forward to that. But another one shows up for me when they're doing these signs and miracles. So check this out. God's saying, I'm going to bring these plagues and bring these signs. And so he sends them out. And Aaron and Moses show up in front of Pharaoh and they say, hey, here, we're going to show you that this is God's power. And they drop this stick on the ground and it becomes a snake like this. The language maybe connotes it might even be kind of almost like a dragon or like a sea monster or something like that. Anyways, some kind of serpentine creature. But what's interesting is Pharaoh calls his magicians, and what do? They do the same thing. If you're reading that, I hope the question pops up to say, well, how the heck did they do that? Like, this is God saying, I'm God, look what I can do. I can turn a stick into a snake. Now, there are some different opinions on this, but what we do know is that historically, it's actually like kind of a common idea that the magicians, kind of the occult priests of that day, could actually bring inanimate objects to life, turn them into creatures. There's this ancient tale of one of these magicians creating like a wax crocodile and throwing him into the river and it becomes like a real life crocodile. Some scholars would say that this is like illusion, trickery, kind of like, when David Copperfield makes the Statue of Liberty disappear. Some would say this actually like them tapping into like dark spiritual arts, like, demonic presence coming and doing that. Some would say somewhere in between. We don't know for sure, but what we do know is we see a God who like exudes his dominance and his power over them. Check this out. Aaron and Moses, they make the stick into a snake and the magicians say, yeah, so whatever, we can do that too. But this idea of theirs going and consuming the snakes that the magicians conjured up is just God saying, listen, just get out of my way and understand who I am. Again, we see this kind of happen again when they go and they turn the Nile into blood, and God does that. But the magicians kind of seem to replicate some of these acts. And we see this throughout the book, where these magicians throughout the plagues are kind of able to do some of it. But it always seems at like a lesser level. And again, I had mentioned earlier on in this podcast series, there's some irony in this book. And again, around the Nile River, I think there's this real irony. God's put this life stream through this dry desert Egypt. And Pharaoh in chapter 1 turns that life stream into a place of death, throws all the Hebrew baby boys into it. And here's God saying, yeah, that was a nice attempt, Pharaoh. Let me show you how the stream of life that I made can become a stream of death. It turns into blood. All the water in Egypt becomes blood. You're drinking a glass of water at home, blood. It's everywhere and everything dies. And he shows Pharaoh, I am the one that has true power. And I want to zero in on this because I think this is especially important. In chapter 5, we saw that Pharaoh, when he's talking to Aaron and Moses, he says, who's this God you're talking about? Who's the Lord? I don't know who God is. He's like, I've never heard of him. Remember, this is this unnamed Pharaoh. He's not even given a name in the text. And I love what God says to Moses and Aaron in chapter 7, verse 5. He says, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. He echoes this idea when Aaron and Moses are talking to the Pharaoh in verse 17. He says, this is what the Lord says. By this you will know that I am the Lord. The God of Exodus, the God of Aaron and Moses, the God of the Bible is this God who is always like displaying and pouring out and exuding his power and his glory and his majesty. It's just coming out of him. In the act of creation, in the act of laying his life down on the cross, he displays his power and glory. And this is one area that we're maybe typically less comfortable talking about, but he displays his power and glory through judgment, through justice, through righteousness. God is the one who will vanquish the oppressor, that will vanquish the slave driver, the slave owner. And what we're going to see through the next little while through God's powerful signs, his miracles, the plagues, is that he is going to display his power and his glory through a righteous judgment on the evil oppressor Pharaoh in Egypt.